Oh, my computer timeout.
No, you're still good. Oh, we're so limited by our technology. There. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad you're all here on this beautiful Saturday morning after a night of weather havoc. It's my pleasure, Fred Allen, as the president of Temple Israel, to welcome you here. I'd like to say that we partner. We're very supportive of the Jackson Purchase Historical Society. Whenever they talk about something with Jewish content, we'd love to have it here. Hopefully, this will be something that goes on for years to come. So thank you, Bill, for again organizing this whole thing. And with that, I'll let you introduce today's speaker.
Thank you very much.
Just real quick, if anyone needs the restroom, it's a big college. If anyone needs the restroom, it's in the back corner on the screen.
Okay. That's very important.
Yes.
Each of our audience needs to know. Well, first of all, again, I want to read. First of all, as always, it's been a joy to work with Fred. We work with a lot of different people, and many of them are not as easy to work with as Fred. And we very much appreciate being able to bring the program to a site that's appropriate for the program. That's one of the things we try to do whenever possible, is to link the subject of the program with the site. And in this instance, I think there couldn't be a tighter mesh, because if we looked in the hall and saw the plaque commemorating the former members, we'll see the names of a lot of the families that Richard's going to talk about.
Wow.
And this may not be the original temple, but it's what the community has, and we're honored that you allow us to have our program here. And so thank you for that, Fred.
Sure, welcome.
If anyone is interested, we have some of our classic free pens in the back on the piano, and a membership form, which we probably more interested in than you are, and a sheet of how to contact us, our website, our Facebook page, email, contact, post office box, if you may want to ask us something. On our website, you can get free access to every back issue of our journal over 50 years. And it's journal has won several awards, and it's provided online free to anyone. We would like you to join, but it's not a requirement. Just as our programs are free. You're welcome. This is kind of a special meeting for me. As Richard likes to tell people, we met on the first day of his freshman orientation at Merck State, and I was his first contact with Merck State, and despite that, he stayed and continued to matriculate. He was a student in a number of my classes, and we met and we stayed friends and in contact over these many years, and I watched him, develop, even though his profession is not in history at the moment. He's published 2 books on local history. He's a regular contributor to our meetings, and has published in our journal. And he has one of his articles in the journal won the award for the outstanding article that year. Wow. So I have a special connection, a sense of pride in Richard. And he's done a lot of work here in Paducah, and this particular topic I think is fascinating. Because I like bourbon and I like baseball. Sometimes even together. So without further ado, Richard.
Well, thanks, especially joining me today on such a nice day. I would have skipped myself. I was up in the parking lot. I was like, it's so nice. Good day for a hike or go explore the outdoors. First, just want to thank Bill and the society members for letting me get up here again and rant about some more boring stuff. And of course, thanks to Fred and all the members of Temple Israel. I think you guys will find this fascinating. Marvin asked me a really good question. How did you get into this? Like Bill said, bourbon. Was looking at just some of the different bourbon brands and distilleries that had connections to Paducah, and I kind of stumbled across this bigger story. And so, yeah, like Bill said the members, some of the families that you'll hear today, kind of what kept them together was the temple. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that came about. All right, so let me get started here. So the man you see here, this is Bernheim and Dreyfuss. He's kind of the main focus of today's presentation, but we got some other stuff to start with. So the first person I'm going to talk about is this man here, Isaac Wolf Bernheim. Now, Bernheim was a huge contributor to Temple Israel. If you look at the Jewish families of the Ohio Valley, he's the author. He wrote it and dedicated it to the temple. Where I learned nearly everything about him and Dreyfuss is his autobiography that he wrote, that Temple Israel actually published. So he had a very close connection with the temple even after he left Paducah. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So Paducah's history is packed full of many people, places, and stories that have impacted the fabric of America. The region has seen its share of people who've gone on to make a dent in America's story. But typically, baseball doesn't come to mind when we think about Paducah. But believe it or not, the man that is credited for baseball's modern-day success called Paducah home for 8 years. And I kind of picked out one of the big times that he came back to Paducah in 1928 when he actually brought his team, Pittsburgh Pirates, here to Paducah to play an expo game against a minor league team. But this was deemed, but the local papers deemed it, it was the greatest baseball day in Paducah's history. But first, that story starts with this man here, Isaac Bernheim. So Bernheim immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1867, and he writes that he only had 2 gold francs, which was about the equivalent of $4 in 1867. So not much. But he was hoping to come over to America post-Civil War to find wealth. There was a lot of opportunities for people in various industries to come over and work. So he was hoping to get a job at his uncle's cotton factory where they made yarn. And that man's name was Mango Livingston, and his name is actually out here in the hallway. But unfortunately, after the Civil War, inflation was up and down. They varied greatly. So by the time Bernheim actually gets off the ship, his uncle's already out of business because the cotton prices couldn't stay stable enough for him to actually make a living. So Mango actually comes back here to Paducah and opens up M. Livingston and Company, which is a very famous dry goods store that I'll show you a picture of here in a second. But Bernheim decides to make the best of a bad situation. So he actually goes to business for himself. He becomes a peddler. And think of peddlers, what I like to always tell people, it's like modern day Amazon. They go into the big cities, they get stuff, and then they kind of take them out to the countryside and try to sell. Of course, it's an inflated price, but guess what? You don't have to waste all the money and waste the time going into the big city to get stuff. Modern day UPS man. And so he really liked this. He kept doing this for pretty much all throughout the summer of 67. But eventually his horse dies. And I always make the joke, but that's like when you're a broke college student and your Honda Civic gives out. Well, guess what? You don't have a car anymore. And so his uncle here in Paducah had been writing to him and saying, hey, there's an opportunity here at my dry goods store if you would like to come on in. I'd be happy to have you. So he eventually comes down. Bernheim writes that he takes the rails from Pennsylvania all the way to Cairo, Illinois. Then he comes by ferry, steamboat, to Paducah, to this building right here, which is C.C. Cohen's, now Stella's. But this is where the M. Livingston and Company's dry goods store was at. And Bernheim would write about how he would sweep the sidewalks, keep the store. He was very good at numbers, so he quickly kind of brought all that chaos into a very modern business pour him out. And he caught the attention of two men that would pretty much change his trajectory forever. Oh, I want to say this one quote too. So this is from his autobiography. He says about Paducah. He says, "I was on my way to Paducah, richer in experience, but poorer in purse than when I landed back in April." So definitely desperate times call for desperate measures. Let's see. So he also wrote this about Paducah. He said that it was regularly laid out, had broad, well-kept gravel streets, and the stores as well as the residents gave the place a prosperous and friendly appearance. So he goes to work there all the way up until about 1871 when he catches the attention of two men, Loeb and Bloom. And these are also two very famous Jewish families here in Paducah. If you go over to Temple Israel Cemetery there in Lono, you'll see, before you can see it from the road, some of the mausoleums with those names. But three factors would push him into joining up with Loeb and Bloom. And Loeb and Bloom were wholesale liquor dealers, which we'll get into here in a second. But the first one, Paducah had a large number of saloons. Actually, right where the market house is at, they used to call that Whiskey Row. Because, like, literally, if you look back in the city directory in, like, 1890, it's nothing but saloons. So Paducah's always had that. That was always been a very big part of our culture. And that's all to do with the rivers. I mean, people would stop off, unload, get wasted, go on down to the next city and do the same. So it was business. A chance to make money. Now the other one was that, oh, that's right, 1871, the city directory said that there was only one wholesale liquor dealer that existed, but there was 18 saloons. So somebody was making money. And of course that was Loeb and Bloom, who were their suppliers. The other thing is that there was this shared Jewish faith between businesses. So a lot of the business owners, they would close their shop up early on like a Tuesday, and all would go to another Jewish business's shop, and they would congregate there, hang out, talk about how things were going for them. And a favorite place for them to always come was, of course, M. Livingston and Company here, because of its location. And basically in his autobiography too, I took this little fact away too, is that he said that this was because Paducah lacked a proper place for Jewish people to recreate after work. And then the third factor was, of course, the relationship the Jewish faith had with the sale of spirits. Of course, in Southern Baptists and Protestantism here was very much frowned upon. And of course, with Jewish history, it's something that has been so for a very long time. So he goes to work with Loeb and Bloom, and he's really starting to get into, and I'll get to, so a little side note too. So he writes in his autobiography that the first official Jewish meeting was held in the third story there. If you look, there's a historical marker down there that says the same thing. But he kind of helped organize that loosely with other people. And then, of course, Temple Israel with the Moorstones. This is right across from United Methodist Church. There, the big parking lot is where it stood. But eventually, that congregation comes out of the third floor of M. Livingston and Company, and they end up building this. All right, so eventually he goes to work, and he's very good at the liquor business. Basically, what it is that he's very organized, and that's something that Loeb and Bloom, they lacked. Okay? And so he gets the company in order. They're selling more products. He's making it easier for the salesmen to get the product and get it shipped out. Of course, how it worked is all the bourbons distilled in eastern Kentucky, then it's shipped down by a steamboat to Paducah, where it's offloaded. Then they would put them in warehouses. So they would age some more. And then, of course, let's say down in Memphis, such and such saloon wants 2 barrels. They would roll the barrels down and ship them down to Memphis. And that's kind of what Loeb and Bloom would do. But they also had salesmen that would just go all around looking for places to sell. And how saloons used to work is you'd walk in, you'd say whiskey, rye, whatever. There was only one brand. They would contract with the saloon where they could only sell one brand. And so very different than it is today. But eventually he gets a job selling as a salesman, and that's what he really wanted to work up to. In his autobiography, it's really interesting because he talks about how he would get together with friends and try to learn American slang and how to talk to people, because of course he was from Germany and spoke German, and they would practice to learn how to sell stuff and use dialect that people understood. And how he got a sales position, it's kind of he talks about it being a kind of a comical event that one of the salesmen had inherited a large amount of money and left his wife, his children, his job, and just ran off. And nobody could find this guy, and so they needed someone to complete his rap for the day, so they threw Isaac in. And he went and actually did a pretty good job, and they said, well, he's gone, so it's your job now. So eventually that allows for his brother, Bernard, to come over. I don't think I have any pictures of him. But Bernard is his partner in crime. And these two would eventually rise up to be the biggest figures in the bourbon industry. And they worked for Loeb and Bloom for a couple years, saving up money. But eventually Loeb and Bloom, they never got the chance that they were promised. The Bernheim brothers kept promising, like, hey guys, you keep on working hard for us, and eventually this will be yours. We'll give you a share of it. Well, they were impatient. They were young. They were ready to hit it rich in America. They didn't want to wait. And so they approached Loeb and Bloom in Christmas asking for a share. And of course, they talked about it, and a few days later, they came back and basically told them, no way, you guys are too young. Like Bernheim, or Barney was, I think, 19 at the time, and they had a very little amount of money that they wanted to invest to get a share of the company. And, basically, Loeb and Bloom were like, hey, just wait your turn. Once you get enough money saved up, come back and talk to us. Well, they weren't having it. So kind of unbeknownst to Loeb and Bloom, they had a financer already lined up. And that turned out to be Elbridge Palmer. If you've ever heard of the Hotel Palmer, he's the guy that was kind of a big financier. He worked in the banking business and really kind of helped stand up a lot of these businesses and families here in Paducah. So eventually, they opened up the Bernheim Brothers in company, and it was the same exact thing Loeb and Bloom did at their wholesale dealers. But they would go and they got different types of bourbon, and then they would bring them back, and they would start what today the industry calls rectifying. So it's like where they would mix certain types of whiskey together, make a different taste, may age it longer. They talk about all sorts of stuff. The same tricks they do today, like one of the big companies ages bourbon out in the ocean. Does that change the profile? Well, who knows? It's a pretty cool thing. But yeah, just little tricks like that. But eventually it would grow and they would get bigger. And this is some of their early decanters and memorabilia that they would give to saloons and stuff to help advertise the brand. And they really went for a brand that was kind of upper class bourbon. Bourbon whiskey was, working man's class stuff. They wanted something that was a little bit more sophisticated, that looked, that people wanted to go in and feel good about themselves. Let's see here. Eventually, they did the same thing. One would sell, one would go out on the road and sell, while the other one operated the operations. Then they would switch for a month. And they talked about doing that over and over. And eventually they get a pretty good market share. They get most of the Midwest and most of the South. So they've grown this into a pretty big business. And this is some of the clippings from our Paducah City Directory here. And again, it was on 3rd Street, Market Square. And eventually they moved in with a partner, Nathan Urey. And Urey would bring some more capital. His father was kind of owed money and then brought it in. And eventually it grows. The company grows pretty quickly. And let me see here. Oh yeah, so eventually they win the 1882 World's Fair, and they were named the best spirit of it. And the I.W. Harper brand that I showed here actually used to carry that medal on it all the way up until like the 90s, because that's how proud they were of it. But eventually the company grows pretty big, and so that's when he reaches back out to his family in Germany for some help. And of course, that's where we get our star of the show, Bernheim and Dreyfuss. So Barney was 19 when he came over to America in 1882, and immediately went to work for his uncles at the 2nd Street location there. And that location is, if you know where Livingston's law firm's at, it's the first condo right behind it. That's where that one was at. And this is where they created their famous I.W. Harper brand. A brand that still, you can go down to any liquor store, it's still for sale. They have a 15-year, that's pretty expensive, and then they have a non-aged one. But eventually, Barney falls in love with baseball. And this would really change his career. When he first got here, he sees baseball. Baseball had been left here in Paducah after the Civil War. Actually, Union soldiers brought it in, and the locals kind of picked it up and kept the tradition alive here. And eventually that spreads out. If you know anything about baseball, the Ohio Valley was very intricate to the founding of baseball proper, with leagues and stuff. And so he witnesses this. He writes about how he would come off of 2nd Street and over to where Farmers Market at and stuff, there would be people playing baseball there. And eventually he gets pretty serious about it, and he figures out pretty early that he's a much better manager than he is a player. He loved the game more than the game loved him. And yeah, there's an early sketch of Fort Anderson, which is kind of where the Civic Center is at, but that whole area is where Bernheim writes, or Dreyfuss writes that he witnessed the game of baseball. So this is a pretty cool thing that I'll share here. So this is a share of the Paducah Baseball Association that is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I found it online in their archives. And if you look down there to the, right there on your left, it's signed Barney Dreyfuss. So Dreyfuss actually tries to come up with his own proper baseball team here. And a lot of this is folks from the distillery. They write that nearly everyone was from the distillery, but he was selling shares of this for $50 each so that people could buy into this baseball. And of course, they would get their money back in attendance fees. But it's a really cool story here on how this came about. So Will was his cousin, I think, and they actually, a flood had happened and they had to clean out a bunch of stuff out of one of the storefronts down on Broadway. And he actually finds this stock certificate here, writes this letter and sends it to Dreyfuss, and then that gets it to the Hall of Fame once Dreyfuss's papers get turned over. So I always tell people there's a little bit of Paducah in what's town is that? Yorkstown? No, Cooperstown? Cooperstown, yeah. But eventually, he gets pretty serious about baseball, and this is the same time as Bernheim Brothers is blowing up. So, right out of Paducah, for 20 years, they had pretty much created a bourbon empire. They become one of the top 5 bourbon distributors in all of America, right here out of Paducah. But the brand runs into problems, and the biggest problem is there's not enough people to work. He's tapped out. A lot of people goes to work for him. Joseph Friedman, his first foray into business would be working for Isaac Bernheim as a salesman. And then, of course, Freeman and Kyler ends up being like the third biggest wholesale liquor. And that's a whole other story. We might be back next year. But they've outgrown Paducah. Also, there was no direct freight line to Paducah from Bardstown at the time, where all the bourbon was being produced. So they were still having to ship stuff down the river, which was slower because the train was the most, the fastest invention at the time. So they had a logistical problem. And so this is actually Barney Dreyfuss' uncle Isaac Bernheim's house here on Jefferson Street. So I think it's like there's this huge red house with the rotunda on sale. The other side of the street, there's like an auto body shop, and then you run right into 9th Street. Somewhere in there is where this house was at. But you can see there the family's on the front porch there, and it looks like in some type of hammock. But by this time, definitely Bernheim, the brothers, were probably the wealthiest citizens of Paducah at the time. But they made the hard choice to leave Paducah. 20 years, very integral into the Temple of Israel. And of course, that's something that he would carry with him. So they go to Louisville, and they start setting up shop there in Louisville. Now, they already had a very big market share. If you actually walk down Main Street, there's a placard that says the location of the Bernheim brothers. And that would open the door for Barney. So he had very stable employment, but by the time he goes to Louisville, the Louisville Colonels are kicking big time. Again, back Ohio Valley, the Reds, all these different teams up and down the river would play each other, and it became really big business. And the Colonels were a major league team, and so Barney just immediately gravitated towards them. He's able to buy part-time shares of it, and then eventually he's able to collect enough shares to become the owner, the majority holder. And this is where he would reformulate the team. They would host more games. And again, he would say that he was a much better manager than he was a player. But some of those names here that some of you guys may remember from your parents or your grandfather. Fred Clark, Tommy Leach, Deacon Felipe, and Hannes Wagner were some of the big stars that he had on his roster. Now, the story kind of goes in two directions, and I'm going to tell the Bourbon direction first, and then we'll talk about baseball. But I think the rest of my pictures are just baseball. But yeah, there's a picture of Wagner's in there of the 1898 Louisville Colonels. So we'll start with the Bourbon vein first. So the Bernheim brothers blow up. They go from rectifying whiskey, taking other people's whiskey, and they build this state-of-the-art, one of the biggest distilleries at the time in Louisville, and it's still standing. I think Kevin Hill owns it. And they really take bourbon to the next step, to where it's modernized. They, again, give it a real classy look to it. But the production of bourbon changes. It starts to turn into more of a year-round process than just a seasonal. And they go on, and of course, Prohibition ends. Prohibition, if you don't know this, Kentucky voted Prohibition in before national Prohibition. There's a few months there where Kentucky went dry. And it absolutely decimated the bourbon industry. I mean, people, I've read about people would go into work, and there was no work. There was nothing. They couldn't make whiskey anymore. It was illegal. But a few bourbon industries, I think it's 5 distillers in Kentucky, actually got licenses to operate during Prohibition. And, of course, our friend Bernheim brothers were one of the recipients of that. So they never actually shut down. And, of course, this was medicinal whiskey. If you guys remember during COVID, one thing that never shut down were the liquor stores. And so they would continue to produce this profits here in the United States. But they also start to get really smart. They were some of the first distillers to start exporting bourbon around the world, exporting it. And one of the biggest places that it catches on at is in Japan. And a lot of that's to do with the World War II post, where a lot of Americans were over there. But the Japanese catch on big time. And so the brand goes all the way up to itself up until the 90s. And then it's closed here in America. They closed the I.W. Harper brand. But it stays alive in Japan. So they're still producing it here in America, but all of it's going to Japan. I'm talking like 23-year-old bourbon, some of the best bourbon in the world. And even today, the company makes a special bourbon just for the Japanese customers because they've had such a long relationship. But during that time, still just talking about Bernheim and bourbon, he ends up one of his his proudest accomplishment that he writes in his book before he dies was during World War II, he paid 10 Jewish families to relocate from Germany to the United States. He paid their way, gave them places to live, to get them out of that. And of course, he was a big philanthropist. If you're familiar with the Bernheim Forest right below Louisville, he owned all that land and donated it to the people of Kentucky there. And that's where him and his wife are buried at. If you ever go, there's this huge statue that kind of is between their graves. But really interesting. But I think I haven't gotten any definite word, just looking at some of the businesses, that he was definitely one of America's richest men. That, again, started out his career here at Paducah and moved on. And the brothers did too. And an interesting link that I just wrote about in Paducah Life a couple of issues ago was his brother Bernard, during Prohibition, kind of wanted to branch out from the bourbon industry. He was really nervous that they were going to go broke if the government decided to shut them down. And so he actually got into the plates and mugs, like dinnerware. And he purchases this company, the J.A. Bauer Company, which was actually started here in Paducah. And it still survives today. And I'm doing a presentation on that at the library, I think next month, if you're interested in that. But that's another really interesting Jewish connection that we got there. But eventually, Bernheim dies, I think it's 1946 or so. But he never forgot Paducah. Like I said, he was a huge supporter of Temple Israel, wrote the history. Another thing is the Carnegie Library here. Well, Paducah quickly outgrew it. It wasn't very big, and they needed an annex, and Isaac Bernheim paid for that, and he named it the Elbridge Palmer Annex after his friend who gave him the money to get into the bourbon business. But anytime there was a flood, any natural disasters that hit Paducah, the Bernheim money was there. And the family, I've traced it up some, but I always try to back off because you don't want to bug somebody who's still alive. But yeah, his great grandchildren are some very wealthy financiers that I found the name or relatives of theirs. But of course, all that brings us back to Dreyfuss. Okay, so now we're going to switch back and talk about baseball. Barney's in Louisville. He's got this chance to buy the team. He buys the team, and of course, he writes in his biography who's funding it. His uncles. He would go ask his uncles for money. They would lend him the money. They would set up a payment plan. He would pay them back. But eventually, the Cardinals get into a situation. Baseball, I think it's the National League. I can't remember. They want to cut it down from 12 teams to 8. Travel got too expensive. Baseball kind of went through. It was kind of fading in the background to other opportunities. And so Dreyfuss is out of luck. And so what he decides to do is to buy the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so he goes back to Uncle Bernheim, both of them, And they give him the money. They say, I think this is a great opportunity. So he takes the Colonels and moves them to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay? He tries to recruit the best of the best, but it actually ends up being one of the best teams that there is. Let me get here back on my notes. Oh, yeah, so let's get to this. Down. Yeah, so eventually, under Dreyfuss, though, the Pirates won the National League Championship in 1901, 1902, and 1903. And so he was kind of having a heyday there in the National League. But he wanted to bring together the National League and the American League. So he writes to his buddy, Henry Killen, I think is that how you say that? Killaway, yeah. Who is the owner of the Boston Pilgrims, who are now the Red Sox. And he writes to him, and he challenges them. So, hey, we're the best of the National League. You guys are the best of the American League. Well, let's find out who's the best baseball team in America. And so they worked out the World Series as the best of 9 games. But unfortunately for the Pirates, they lost 5-3 games. So Boston beats the snot out of them. And they lost the rights to the first World Series bragging rights. But despite not winning the World Series, the Pirates were the premier National League team. And they finally did win the World Series in 1909 and 1925 and several other National League championships. He gets back connected to his West. Oh, yeah, there's the first Pirates at the first World Series there. And some of those Colonel players are still on the team. But this brings us to a really cool story. There's a historical society in Henderson that always invites me over. And so I found this, dabbling through some history there. But he had a connection to Dawson Springs. And a lot of baseball teams would come to Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky for spring practice. Now they all go all the way down to Florida and live it up in Miami and stuff during spring training. But they used to come here. And so this is a picture of the Pirates in front of the Dawson Springs Salt and Water Company. And that was a popular retreat where people would go to the Salt Springs and it was supposed to cure you. Who knows what all good elements they were taking in there to make them live longer. But this is eventually where he decides to build his new spring training. So this is a reconstruction of that original stadium that's still around. You can go see this in Dawson Springs. But they would host games for the community. Other teams would come in and play them. And they would do this for, I think it's about 3 years. And he relocates them from Hot Springs, Arkansas, back here to be a little bit closer to his family and friends in Paducah. So this was rebuilt, I think it burned down in the 30s. Yeah, it burned down in the 30s. And then the city rebuilt this in the late 1999 for like tourists to come in. They still hold some games here. I think somebody was trying to do like a minor league team and it kind of went bust. Let's see here. But the team's success made Dreyfuss a very wealthy man. But despite his wealth, he never forgot about Paducah. Oh yeah, there's the pennant winner. You can see Dreyfuss there in the middle. 1927. But that brings us to a Paducah story I'd like to throw in here. So he kind of never forgot about Paducah. He always was constantly writing to his cousins and friends that he had made along the way. And his cousins had been begging him to come to Paducah. Like, come to Paducah, come speak to some of us businessmen here. We'd love to hear how you're doing. And of course, with the schedule, it was just always too much. But he finally gave in 1927, and he comes to bring the Pittsburgh Pirates here. Let's see here. He tried to get here a few times before, but it was always like a late winter would hit, and so they weren't able to travel. So he arrives here in Paducah on April 9th, 1928, and he stays at his cousin Ben Wiley. That's down in Lower Town if you guys know where they host the Lower Town Festival at, that spot where it's vacant, well, that used to be a super fancy apartment complex. And that's where the Wileys lived, and that's where Dreyfuss stayed at during this visit. It was called the Rhodes Apartment in Lower Town. But they hosted, the city hosted a luncheon for him at the Hotel Palmer, where he spoke. Also, his son, Sam Dreyfuss, and then the manager of the Pirates, Donnie Bush. And then they invited the manager of the opposite team, the Fort Wayne Chiefs, to speak too. But basically, he gets up, he tells people about his success, talks about how Paducah had such an impact on him, retells the story that he writes about seeing baseball for the first time here in Paducah when he got settled in. And later on that night, the Pirates arrived from Jackson, Tennessee. This is a little bit later where they started going on down south, more south for spring practice. And they made their way to James Hook Field. So that was a very, let me see if I don't have a picture of that one. Famous baseball field here. The Reds had actually played there a couple years before. But of course, you know, the hometown boy brings his team back. And about 4,000 fans showed up. And the Pittsburgh Pirates absolutely beat the snot out of them. The next day's headline, it read, "The Pittsburgh Pirates bombard Fort Wayne to win, 11-1." But the article, said that there was thousands of people there, the most attended baseball game since the Reds took on played Hooksville 8 years before. Basically, the Pirates were in control of the game the whole time. And then after the game, they actually traveled up to St. Louis to play the Cardinals. So that was the beginning of the season. They were the away team for the Cardinals home opener. And the article said this, and it says, the Pirates enter the National League race as favorites to retain their crown. From their expedition here, they will succeed. And so, a cool thing I always like to point out is they were the World Series champions that year prior, and he brings them here to Paducah. So it's a pretty cool thing that was, I don't know if it was exactly their next game, but close to one of their first games since winning the World Series. But the Pirates did not fare well in 1928. They ended the season in fourth place, and the Pirates never again win a series. That was it. But that didn't stop Dreyfuss. Dreyfuss actually ends up becoming the vice president of the National League. And in baseball, that's what he's most remembered for, is being this long-serving National League president. And he served that all the way to his death at the age of 66. One of the most things he's notable for is banning the spitball. He absolutely thought it was disgusting, and he hated it, and he gave the pitcher an unfair advantage. And so he spearheaded this thing in the National League. And they did. They banned the spitball. But the funny thing was, 17 of them could still do it because they were grandfathered in, which I think is pretty funny. So eventually he gets nominated to the Hall of Fame. And it's here, if you look here, German immigrant Barney Dreyfuss played a significant role during the development years of baseball. And a really neat little piece of Paducah there. If you go to Louisville, next time you're on Louisville, walk down Main Street. There's all these baseball bats. And of course we think Louisville Slugger when we think about Louisville. But we don't realize how much the Colonels had an impact on baseball through Barney Dreyfuss. And it's really amazing just to see that stuff and think, wow, there's a little connection back to Paducah that was able to make this happen. So I always like to tell folks that, every fall, baseball season just started, there's always a little bit of Paducah in every single game there because of Barney's time as the vice president of the league. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, those two families stayed very close together. I know for a fact that Bernheim spent a lot of time researching the early histories, and all that's available on archives.org. All of his writings about the temple stuff, and it's been instrumental in this story. And these families, it's so neat. I always find just like a little bit more of the story for where a little part of Paducah they took somewhere else. And I really enjoy that. It's a lot of history that people have forgotten about. And even every time I tell people like the Jewish history here in Paducah, they have no clue. And it's amazing how many of these Ohio River cities really were the backbone was the Jewish community. Some of the stuff that I forgot to say, I think and you guys got it up on your website, I think the 1882 city directory, 33% of Paducah businesses were Jewish owned. That's a very significant number for 1890s South. Very significant. So that's pretty much the story of the Bernheims and the Dreyfuss up to this point. I hope one day to stop being so busy and maybe get to research this a little bit more. There's Bernheim's archives. They're at the University of Louisville. They have a very robust collection that all went there after his death, and of course